So I talked about Dr. Banks. Dr. Banks injected these animals with aluminium into the belly. And what he found that the blood-brain barrier became very permeable after that. And again, he found there was no rise in the blood. And you should know by now there's a reason for that, because the aluminium is taken up by the immune cells and travels through the lymphatic system and ends up in different organs. It doesn't go into blood. So there are 4 important articles that you should all take a picture of this slide, because these are important articles to anybody who wants to understand more about the problems with aluminium. Should read all of these articles and read them very carefully. And they might take you some time, but it's worth the time that it takes, because they all outline different problems with aluminium. And I'm going to be going through some of them. This is just a picture out of the one by Dr. Shaw's group. And this is a really important article because it goes through each organ system. And it's highly referenced, it's highly scientifically referenced. And these scientists did a very comprehensive job of looking at the toxicity that has been shown in different times and different animals, including humans, with aluminium and all the different systems. And they find that it increases autoimmune problems. I talked about the blood-brain barrier. I talked about the macrophages. This disease called myophagic myofasciitis. This is a disease that we know is caused by aluminium. It talks about the central nervous system and a lot of the studies that I went through, plus more studies about how it affects the cognitive function, how these animals are able to think. It talked about what happens at a molecular level. We're highly dependent on water in our bodies. You're about between 75% and 80% water. And so how water works and the structure of water is really important. And they've shown that when you put aluminium into a system, that it changes what they call the zeta potential of the water, and how that water, the charge on the water changes, affects how all these different kinds of molecules in your bodies function. And then it talks about this genetic problems of what it does to the DNA and how it changes how DNA functions and which genes are open and which genes are closed. It talks about, because aluminium is so highly charged, positively charged, +3, that it's very highly attracted to negatively charged proteins. And you're pretty much made of protein. Besides the water, you're made of protein. And most of the proteins, many of them anyway, are negatively charged. And for a protein to work properly, it has to be the right shape, especially if you're an enzyme, that kind of protein. So if you need an enzyme to be curled up for it to function, and aluminium comes in and opens it, it won't work anymore. And this is a common problem when you put aluminium into a system. So it changes enzyme function. It's a highly stressful oxidant. So it increases oxidant stress. This is all very well defined. It changes the way cells are able to communicate with each other. Imagine, you started out as 2 cells meeting. And somehow those cells were able to communicate with each other to make a line of cells. And then they were able to communicate with each other to stem out and start making organs. And now all of your cells are communicating with each other to keep everything working like a giant battery. It's pretty miraculous. Well, you couldn't do that without those cells being able to communicate with each other. And so aluminium disrupts the ability of cells to communicate, both regular cells and brain cells. So I think that's enough to summarize that article there. But there's one other picture from that article which I think tells 1,000 words. And I'm going to explain this to you, so just hold on a minute. So there's something called a glycocalyx. And this glycocalyx, this is a cell, the outer layer of a cell when it's healthy. And so you have this negative charge and all these sulfates, okay? And that's a healthy cell. And this glycocalyx is especially important in heart, in blood vessels, and in the gut. And disruption of this glycocalyx leads to disease, all right? So this is what it looks like normally. You have this system here, just look at this outpouching, this thing called enos. That's normal, all right? This is in a state of health. Well, you toss aluminium into there, and you've created chaos. And what happens is this nice negatively charged sulfate outer portion breaks down. Look, it's gone. It's got holes in it. And this thing called enos stops working properly. It backs away, it's not communicating and putting out more sulfur. Instead, it starts making nitrous oxide. Aluminium fluoride. Remember, fluoride is highly reactive as well. This is why we don't need it. It's why it doesn't belong in our bodies or our drinking water. But you put aluminium and fluoride together, and they love each other. And so they will hang out and they will start disrupting signals going into the cell and cause all kinds of disruption. So now this outer portion isn't being made properly. Cell-to-cell communication won't be as good, and you can develop disease in those systems. We'll just do this picture and then we'll take a break. So aluminium. We know that aluminium makes, okay, first I'm going to explain what this is. This is another picture of a cell membrane. I'm just giving you another view of it that an artist designed. And a cell membrane has these layers, okay? And so inside of these layers, all these proteins are floating through. So they're not just staying there. Everything's kind of moving through these phospholipids that are right here, okay? So this is inside the cell, this is outside the cell, and this is the membrane. And so you have all of these switches that regulate what happens inside the cell. You have something like, I think it's 100,000 switches on each cell of your body. That's amazing, okay? It's amazing that one cell can have 100,000 switches, but it does. So these are all proteins that are communicating messages from outside to inside, telling that cell what to do, what proteins to make, where to go, how to act. And so it's really important that these proteins can float freely through this membrane and be able to function and communicate. And we know for certain, based on these 3 studies, that aluminium changes the way that these phospholipids function. It changes myelin in the brain, okay? Myelin in the nervous system is like the insulating cord that makes transmission of impulses happen rapidly. We know that it changes myelin and it makes it stiff. And it changes that membrane fluidity. So basically, to put aluminium into this system is not only like punching holes in it, but it's also like layering it with plastic. It just doesn't function the way it should after a while. So I think we should take a break now, and then we can talk about it. All right, so